Welcome everyone. Bonjour à tous. My name is Onome and I'm the Executive Director of Amref Health Africa in Canada. And I'm very delighted to be moderating this session. My thanks to CanWaCH for inviting me. When Julia extended the invitation, she did it based on the premise of the work that Amref Health Africa does in the youth space. And also on the premise of me being a member of the board of directors, not on the premise of being a youth. But I'm extra delighted to be introducing our diverse youth panelists who will be tackling several thought-provoking questions. But before we dive into our conversation, just give me a moment to go over some logistics and housekeeping. So this session will be presented in English with simultaneous translation available in French by Interaction. You can download the mobile app and use the code CanWaCH20. That is CanWaCH20. More information on how to use this feature has been shared in the chat box. Now, to the business of the session. How do we define a youth leader? There's no universally agreed definition of the age group of a youth. The UN defines the youth as persons between 15 to 24. The African Union actually extends this age to 35. And to my father, I'm a 40-something-year-old youth. But does age really matter? And what makes a young leader in Canada's international development community? Allow me to introduce our panelists today who will be tackling this age-long question, and who, by the way, make me feel like an underachiever with their impressive CVs. So I'll start with Julia. Julia is the acting CEO of CanWaCH. She works closely with the board of directors, including myself, to implement the organizational strategic plan. Julia holds a Master's of Arts degree in Canada and Indigenous Studies from Trent University. And she has over 15 years of experience in the international development and not-for-profit sectors. She has worked with youth across the globe on international development and has led many senior positions in the space as well. Julia is a volunteer working with New Canadians at the Refugee Settlement Center and has served on several boards. Welcome, Julia. And my next guest is Yipeng Ji. Yipeng is first-generation Chinese Canadian. He completed his undergraduate studies with honors at McMaster University in health sciences with a specialization in global health. He's a resident physician in Ottawa in public health and preventative medicine. And he's also Canada's official youth delegate to the World Health Assembly and Pan American Health Organization, Directing Council. In addition to being passionate about health equity, Yipeng enjoys running and cycling along the Rideau Canal and spending time with his family and friends. So I think we're in really good company with you, Yipeng, today. And last but not the least is Natasha. Natasha is a Lebanese Canadian feminist activist. I did tell you that we have a very diverse panel today. She's the Youth Participation Advisor at the UN Girls Education Initiative, where she leads the youth-led movement, Transform Education. Natasha is also the co-founder of Cat Calls of Ottawa, which works to end gender-based street harassment through chalk art. Natasha holds a BA honors in international development with a minor in gender studies from the University of Ottawa. Now, with that being said, I would like to kick off the conversation. So why don't we start with you, Natasha, followed by Yipeng and then Julia to answer our first question. What does being a young leader mean to you?
Thank you so much. Happy International Youth Day, everyone. And thank you, CanWaCH, for having me. It's an honor to be able to speak on this panel. So today I started off my day by hosting a creative collective with young leaders from around the world. They're all mobilizing and creatively responding to gender equality and education issues in their communities. And as young leaders, we are resilient, we are flexible, we are adaptable, grassroots, and we're creative. You know, we take up space to really amplify our peers and really including the most marginalized voices as well. We demand change. Young leaders are young people in their diversity. We can be bold, we can be quiet, we can be whatever. And I think often there's a stereotype of what a young leader is, and we really need to go beyond that. You know, young leaders also are contextual, as you said, and they're fluid. It varies between regions. I work with young leaders as young as 15 to as old as 35 and plus, and we really have to define how they respect themselves, how they identify themselves. And I recently read a statistic that there are 1.2 billion youth around the world from 15 to 24. That's almost like 16% of our world. And that's a lot of youth power. That's a lot of young leaders. So all in all, to me, being a young leader is being bold and being brave. And thank you.
I guess that's my cue to go. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak on this panel. So thank you to CanWaCH, and thank you to the three other speakers on this panel for coming together in this space together. You'll see that I'm in a clinic room. As mentioned, I'm a health and preventive medicine resident physician, and I also want to thank my resident or residency program and staff preceptor for allowing me to join this call in between clinic appointments. And also, I think on that note, I'm speaking from the traditional unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin people. And I'm in one of the clinic rooms at the Briere Family Health Team. I think when I think about young leaders or youth leadership, in terms of the two different components there, I think it's already been mentioned how there isn't a set definition for what youth is defined as internationally or in Canada. I tried to do a bit of research in the context of Canada, and you know, Statistics Canada uses something like ages 16 to 28, and then the Human Resources and Skills Development Canada use something like ages 15 to 24. And then I looked back on the eligibility criteria for the role that I have the privilege of being Canada's youth delegate to the World Health Assembly. The criteria is ages 18 to 30. And so I think, you know, I think there are these arbitrary numbers to try to define something that we try to capture as someone who's kind of early in their trajectory of life and their career path and their professional and personal development. But then that's also in the context of, I think, what we think about is a full, fulfilled life. And the standard of living I think about is something that has, and the length of life in different contexts is something that is also, you know, disproportionate when you think about global comparisons. And so, and recently, earlier today, I listened in on to the World Health Organization's Dr. Tedros's remarks on International Youth Day today. And he mentioned that, and it was a new statistic to me, that over half of the world's population is actually under the age of 35. And so I'm really glad that this conversation is happening, that such a celebration of young people, broadly defined, is happening. And the other term, leader, I think about in the context that, you know, anyone can have acts of leadership in any certain environment, and depending on the situation at hand. I think back to a special that has been shared to me, and is a readily available TED Talk on small acts of leadership called Lollipop Moments by Drew Dedley, who speaks about the power of small acts of leadership and kindness that can make a lasting impression on just, one other soul in this world. And if you change that one other person's perspective on any particular issue or their worldview or how they see other people, I think that, you've changed the world for one other person. And that is how we change the world, because there's all these different perspectives, over 7 billion perspectives, human perspectives on what the world ought to look like. So I think when we combine those two words, we come to a space where, you convey passion, empathy, and work to think about all these complex issues that the world is facing, and bring in these fresh ideas that young people often have. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks. I'm happy to go last because I was really interested in your comments, but also you've said so many of the critical pieces, both of you. And I think when I think about youth and young leadership, I really have kind of landed in a new place. When you look at the challenges that we face right now, from climate change to COVID to inequality, I mean, these challenges are broader, more interconnected than they ever have been in history, right? We haven't faced a time where if we don't cooperate globally, we cannot solve climate change from Canada. No one country can address these challenges, these huge global complex spaces on their own. So that requires collaboration, that requires working together. And fundamentally that requires listening and hearing. And when I think about myself as a young leader, when I was younger, or even now, some still consider me fairly young, I think about the need that I had, kind of born out of imposter syndrome and born out of feeling like I didn't have a right to be in a space. So the need that I had to prove that I was learned, that I knew something, that I knew a lot of things, and I was here because I deserved to be here, and all these kinds of things. And as I reflect now on leadership and the types of leaders that I want to work for and be around and be surrounded by, they're not learned, they're learners. They're people who are constantly learning and trying to understand. That requires listening, that requires engagement, that requires changing your mind and your opinion and not locking in to whether it's partisan politics or whether it's a position on this is right and that is wrong, right? And if we're really going to tackle the global challenges that are in front of us, we need leaders, and we need young leaders. We need all leaders to show up as those types of learners. And I think I felt, as I'm coming into positions where I have more authority in things, I feel more comfortable and more confident to be a learner than I feel like I did when I was, at 23, I sat on the board of directors of the Canadian Council for International Cooperation. I was the youngest person by 20 years to be sitting with my colleagues who are brilliant, smart, people who had been in the sector for 10, 15, 20 years. And I felt intimidated. So I wanted to prove myself. So I think when I think about the word leadership, as Yipeng said, and when I think about the word young, I just think let's aim collectively to be the leaders that learn, and not like I felt like I had to prove that we are leaders who are learned. Yeah, and I think I'm seeing more of that. I'm seeing more, Natasha, you just said, you're at a session with people from all over the world talking about what are the strategies, how are you doing things? And I think that, we can learn a lot from that. And I think that's the direction. I don't see how we're going to solve the challenges in front of us without that. Back to you, Onome.
Thank you so much to all of you for those, really great points that you've made. I completely hear on the piece around, stereotypes around young people, Natasha, as you said, and Yipeng, I think, very, really critical to understand the small acts of leadership. And again, a word that resonated, Julia, that you said was, how do you, as a collective, we're facing so many challenges today, and it's really essential that we overcome the stereotypes that we have and work as a collective and, have the little acts of kindness or various acts, that puts us in the fore of leadership. And so it brings me to my next question. And in, very quick, I'll say, 2 minutes. Why is it important to have youth leaders at the fore of social issues? Yipeng, why don't we start with you?
Sure. It's an interesting question because, not only is it important, but I think youth have led the way in some of the most complex, challenging issues. Already mentioned, like things like climate change, like things like racial equity and justice. We see today's youth lead conversations, demand change, organize collectively, and seek out, where systems have gone wrong, human-made systems made by people that have come before us. I think we're in a really special time where, with the world so connected, with knowledge so vastly shared, so accessible for many people, sometimes a bit too much. I think the word infodemic has been shared in thinking about this overload of information. But we're in this unique where young people around the world are listening, are paying attention, and demanding change. So I think we've gotten over that place of understanding and contextualizing various issues in global health, in global diplomacy, around equality and justice, whether it be for racial equity and justice, or gender equity and justice, whether it be in the context of environmental equity and justice, thinking about climate action. We're beyond that state of understanding where things have gone wrong, and youth are actively organizing and moving those issues forward and demanding change, and thinking about how to be a part of those decision-making processes, and thinking about governance structures and how youth can be a part of that process. Because I think had they been a part of that process from the inception of some of these human systems that have led to these very complex, wicked issues, we might not be in the state that we are in today, because I think the fresh perspective that youth bring is one that is unbiased, untarnished, from a lot of understanding where some of the kind of normalities or status quo are within the world, and kind of demanding really progressive policy program kind of change. So I think they are leading the way, and it's thinking about how do these human systems respond and allow for those voices to be heard in a meaningful way, whether it be through looking at governance structures, whether it be looking at processes that meaningfully include youth.
Thanks, Yipeng. And Natasha, I was going to pause there to have you finish your water, but go ahead.
Thank you. Hell yeah, we know what's up. We know what's fresh. I mean, I ask myself, why shouldn't we be at the forefront? Because we're experiencing the impacts of gender inequality, the impacts of global health. And not only are we the beneficiaries, but we're the partners, right? And as Yipeng said, we're in the ground, we're leading change. Just really quickly, I think in my work, I'm actively working to ensure that a diverse group of young leaders are at the forefront, are in, you know, UN meetings, are in working groups, etc. And I'm constantly told how grateful, for example, UNESCO is to have a representative of a wide constituency at the table, because they're bringing fresh perspectives. They're able to mobilize, well, we're able to mobilize really, really quickly and use the digital space. I mean, right now, of course, being aware that there is a huge gender digital divide, those who do have access to the digital space, we really do know how to use that and really create, you know, a change and respond to these issues that are relevant and that will work for us. So I guess, I mean, we know how to respond to our issues the best and what works in a creative way. So that's really my response to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Julia.
Yeah, I think, I mean, two responses building on what my colleagues both just said. I mean, I think it's not why is it important, it's the reality is youth are at the forefront of these issues. So there's no kind of changing that reality. And I think you see that in every critical social movement that exists on the planet. Youth and young people are leading them. And they are the most effective organizers. And they, I mean, look what happened recently in the States with a rally for a particular political party, right? Like these young people are leading these movements. And so I don't think the question is, why is it important? It's how do you make sure that you're creating and maintaining space for meaningful and diverse participation. So I think that's, you know, we said if half the population of the world is under 35, then youth are as diverse as the rest of the population, and making sure that you're creating space and that you're not saying youth represent youth. No, youth represent particular constituents of youth, and it's important that you recognize and acknowledge which constituents that particular youth or young person is representing, and really calling that into question, as Natasha said, and making sure you have a diversity of perspectives at the table, not assuming that one person or 10 people can represent the whole of a youth demographic in a country or a region or whatever. So I think they're doing the work, and it's about making sure that you're acknowledging and respecting the work that's being undertaken, and propelling it forward rather than creating blockages. I think that was all I was going to say, yeah.
Thank you so much, Julia. So I think that all three of you have actually really captured some salient points here. And, you know, some of the things I heard was that, you know, the youth are definitely a diverse group, you know, leading change. And I think also heard the need to have, you know, youth involved in the governance structures of organization. And I think that leads me to my next question. And Julia, I will address that to you. So you did mention that you're a relatively young leader of an organization. So can you, and you're doing a great job, by the way. What are the pitfalls in having the youth label, right? How have you seen that transition from being very young, being, on boards, and now slightly older and being leading an organization as CanWaCH? Is the youth label, do you find it useful? And when do you find that it's not useful to you?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think this is something I've debated with friends and colleagues and youth and employers with for some time, because I think that my own experience was, and when I was working with other groups of youth, so I was working with groups of youth that were maybe 3 or 4 years younger than me, so just a little bit behind. They were high school students and I was a new graduate from university. And what I always said to them, and what I felt like was a good advice for myself, was use the youth label to get you access, and then try to hide the youth label once you're there. So literally, like, if you need to get in the door and you need to have the youth panelist, youth representative on your chest to get in, fine, then flip it over once you're inside. Because I really think that young people bring to the table themselves. They don't need to be there just because they're a youth. They need to be there because they've got good ideas, represent diverse perspectives, or thinking about things, or active. And I've been really encouraged when I looked at, sort of started with the Obama administration, but then certainly in our political parties here in Canada, and this is across the board, the Liberals, Conservatives, and NDP right now, and the Greens. You've got a lot of young people working for those parties, engaged. They are the policymakers, they are the thinkers, they are the, and I think about that, and I look and I go, they didn't get into those jobs because they were youth. They got into those jobs because they had ideas and whatnot. They may have used the youth label at times to get an internship here, to do this, to get a position here, but then they took all of that experience and are applying it to who they are and what they're doing and how they're working. And I think it's dangerous to allow the youth label to, I guess, define, or the young label to define us and walk in front of us. I think we need to walk in front of it. And it's a subtle difference, but it is important, because I think I fundamentally believe that when someone shows up, regardless of their age, I want to hear from them. I want to hear their perspective. And if they're constantly saying, well, I'm the youth, I want to get past that and understand, okay, so what are you trying to say? What do you want? What are you bringing to the table? What is of interest to you? Bring me that. And I think a lot of the youth internship programs and things like that, they can have a reverse effect of creating kind of, oh, well, that's the youth job over there. That's the thing that we're putting over there and we're doing because we need to have youth participation. Versus if the young person is able to say, yeah, I got in because of that, but I'm going to do all these things and I'm going to leave that label behind. It can be a more effective strategy in the long term. Use it when you need it and ditch it when you don't, and try to use it with, I guess, use it more scarcely than others would allow you to do, because you show up as who you are and you've got a lot to contribute. I don't know if the other two panelists have had experience with that, or have had that kind of turn bad on them, or whatever it is, but I'd be open to your thoughts on it for sure.
Absolutely. Thanks, Julian. I think I was actually going to open up for both Yipeng and Natasha to comment on that. When do you use the youth label, like you said, and when do you ditch the youth label? How helpful has it been for you in your journeys? Natasha, go ahead.
I relate to everything you just said, Julia, so much. Being a 23-year-old working for the UN and in this field, I've definitely experienced both the pitfalls and the benefits. Like pitfalls being treated differently than my older colleagues when I'm representing my organization. I've often been asked if I'm someone's daughter, or am I a volunteer? No, I'm here as a human. And then, also remember to speak adult-like, or remember to write adult-like. And I'm going around not advertising myself as a youth, but as advertising myself as, hey, I'm the UN Youth Participation Advisor, and I'm here to change the way and the structure that young people and youth-led networks work in this space. But at the same time, I really echo what you said. Get into that space, do whatever it takes, but once you have that space, share what you know, talk about gender equality, really show that, you're an expert, because I often find a lot of young people, we're so used to, being like, this is why we have to be here. But once we're in the space, let's stop saying why we have to be there and let's start just demonstrating and really getting things done, and seeing that sustainable, accessible change as well. Those are my words.
Thanks, Natasha. Yipeng, what are your thoughts? What are your reflections around, using the label or dumping the label?
Well, I think one of my first reflections is, I'm really sorry, Natasha, that you had that experience. Like, that's really unacceptable for someone to kind of assume that, you're someone's daughter, or, you are, just to assume someone's identity in a certain space. I think that's quite unacceptable. I think it's an interesting, concept of this identity label, right? Knowing that all of us are complex human beings with unique intersectional identities that make us who we are. And I've only been able to, speak and conduct myself or go into a practice based on my identities and what I know, and I draw from those experiences. But it's impossible for any one of us to holistically and very comprehensively represent the youth, quote unquote youth label. It's quite impossible, and you wouldn't expect that of any other group or representative. And as we know, as we've already talked about, youth is just such a diverse identity, and in some ways I think it's almost like a frame of mind for many. You can be youthful, and you can come into a and still have really great perspectives. I think thinking about coming in with an open mind, coming in with a lot of humility, coming in ready to learn, I think are all qualities of being a youth that don't have to stick to a particular age group. On Julia's really interesting piece of advice, I think from my own experiences, I think we all do a bit of this like survival mode of when you enter a new space. How do you understand this, the societal and cultural beliefs or values of a certain space that you're entering, so that you can feel safe to be who you are? And sometimes those spaces are not safe enough for youth, and that means turn that name tag. That means acting or behaving in a certain way so that you don't get kind of cast aside or put down in any way or disrespected. And I think that's very natural for all of us to do, but I think I would like to kind of put a twist to that piece of advice from Julia, and ask that the organizations that have a youth representative or representatives, or more effectively maybe a youth committee, or thinking about ways to really effectively and meaningfully include youth in governance processes, to provide a safe space. So those kinds of that sense of being unsafe in a space where you have to conceal a part of your identity to feel belonging in that space, so that doesn't even have to happen, so that we can label ourselves with different, but we can talk to each other as respectable, compassionate human beings, as opposed to label this, label that. So yeah, I think it'd be really exciting to move beyond that label, but recognizing that there are the systems in which things happen. We still have those labels to be able to conduct certain committees and meetings. So recognizing that reality, I think there's work to be done on both sides to kind of reevaluate those biases to what we attribute to certain identities.
Thanks so much, Yipeng. Those are really, solid reflections that you've given. And I would like to probe just a little bit in terms of, the safe space idea. What message would you have, for young people that are in, spaces that are occupied by older people? What message do you have for them in breaking those barriers that they feel that they have? How do they approach others in occupying that space? And on the flip side, what message would you have for organizations, to open up and to create safe spaces for young people? Because I think it's really, something practical that we can be taking away from today's session.
If I can jump in and tackle that, and I'd love to hear others' thoughts on it. But I think it's this broader discussion around building a safe space, and building a safe space means thinking about what explicit or not explicit biases exist within that cultural framework that exists in a certain organization, in a certain space. I think a lot of, important conversations have happened in these past few years and perhaps revitalized in these past few months around equity, diversity, and inclusion, kind of being this cluster of a thing that exists in hopefully many organizations. But it's like, how do you get beyond like a cultural competency training that makes it so, it's how do you know what you know in terms of the biases or prejudices that you might bring, whether it be intentional or not, and how do you know what you don't know? And that is really hard to think about, and often takes a lot of self-reflection, work on ourselves to recognize that based on who we are, based on our experiences and the things that we've been taught and the worldview that we hold, there's a lot that we also don't know, and we won't be able to find those things out sometimes on our own. So it takes reading things like how to be an anti-racist and how do you have those practices on an ongoing basis. And it's not a once and you're done kind of thing. It's a day-to-day lesson and teaching, depending on where you're at with all of that, so that you work with other colleagues to build safer places, because I don't think the perfect environment exists, because it's all dependent on that context. So I think we need really compassionate leadership that has an equity lens to either an individual leader does or a system or an organization has, to build those safe spaces for youth, but understanding all those complexities around whoever you identify in a way, in a way with that identity, you are oppressed in some way. You are affected by those pre-existing cultural biases. It's how do you break that down, and it affects so much more than just youth. But I'm really happy that this was brought up in this conversation.
Julia, go ahead. I see you're itching to say something.
No, I couldn't. So CanWaCH has always been a virtual organization. So we use the mute button as like an indication of I'm ready to speak, but whoever can go first. Yeah, I appreciate definitely where this conversation has gone, because I do think it's important, this idea of showing up and who needs to do the work. Do you need to flip the badge, or does it need to be a safe space? I do think it's a little bit of both, right? I think that we can become, certainly I'll speak to my own experience as a young leader, complacent in, yeah, I don't know how else to say it, of just sort of like, having access because you're a youth and not showing up fully as yourself in that space, and sort of hiding. What I did was hide behind it at times. And I think that's the point that I'm trying to make, is you don't want to be hiding behind an identity. But I also completely agree with everything you said about, if the reason you have to hide a piece of who you are is because you're being discriminated against, or not, or even just not feeling like you're going to be valued for who you are, because the space hasn't been created, that's equally problematic. And it's probably a bit of a chicken and egg. Like it's very individual. We're showing up with those insecurities and those realities reflecting what's going on around us. And what is going on around us is some of that kind of discrimination. So I think there's work, as you said, for everyone involved on that front, and for kind of, it's a very personal, personal reflection, and the work has to be done at the individual level, right? Because if you walk in and you're like, yeah, I am the youth representative and I have a ton to say, and you can sit down, I'm going to put my hand up first, you'll probably create a space for yourself that's different than if you kind of sit back. And I at times was the person who sat back, and I was at times the person who didn't. I also think, in sort of the youth label is an interesting one compared to when we're talking about conversations around about racial inequality, when we're talking about conversations around gender and gender diversity. The youth label is different because it is so much bigger and it is not clearly defined. And coming full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning, there was, with the UN, there was youth programs, and I think someone mentioned the African Union, who define youth up until 35. So that means that I'm just barely not a youth anymore, right? And then there's others that say it's 18 is the age. So because it's this broad and undefined label, I do think it's a little bit different than kind of other identities that we hold as well, because it both connects us to this much, half the world's population, in a different way. And it also can be arbitrary, so it can feel like it's not, sort of not a label that's ours to hold. And of course, then you lose it at some point too, unlike other identities that sort of can stay and go. So I think, as you said, there's work to be done on both fronts. I think the youth label merits specific and a bit of a different conversation, but on the general principle of being able to show up as who you are, and having the kind of leadership around you and the leadership capacity to allow people to show up as who they are. I mean, I think that is leadership, going back to our original conversation. Natasha, I'm interested in your thoughts.
They echo a lot of what you said. And also, as young people, it's okay to put up boundaries. We have to put up boundaries. We need to care for ourselves, but also care for ourselves as the collective as well, supporting each other. There's power in numbers. I think often, when we're put in a space, if it's too much for us, we're scared to say it's too much because that makes us look weak. No, burnout is a real thing. I'm sure everyone in this panel can talk about that. And we're young and we need to take care of ourselves. And then also, in terms of actionable things that organizations can take, I think it's number one, grow the safe space and partnership with youth. Ask them what you can do to ensure that their participation is safe. A lot of young activists risk their lives in the work that they're doing. And in some contexts, it's really unsafe to be a young advocate or a young activist. So it's asking, how can we ensure that we're not putting your name out, or we're not doing something without your permission, or is this conversation okay for you to be in? So it's very simple. Let's just have like a two-way conversation and see how we can both kind of grow a really beautiful safe space of solidarity where everyone feels like they can actively participate and they really truly feel safe. Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha. Thanks for sharing those very practical steps as well. And Yipeng and Julia, thanks for your thoughts. I know that we're kind of beginning to run out of time. So great segue to the next question. Natasha, you lead the movement Transform Education, the UN Girls Education Initiative. And so how can organizations, again, I know you've reflected on this a little bit, but is there more you can say about how organizations can enable youth-led initiatives from within, in an institution like the UN, for example?
Yes, 100%. And just to add, I'm also part of a global youth-led movement called Talkback. And so I'm coming from both the perspective of being in the UN space, but then also this perspective of being on the ground and part of a movement. And it's critical that organizations are partnering with youth-led networks, youth-led initiatives, and movements as well. Opposed to just working with young people as individuals, because they represent a diverse group and a lot of experiences and bring a lot of value as well. So how do we enable them? Number one, funding. We need to fund youth-led networks, initiatives, and movements. I can't stress that enough. First of all, our time is of value. When we're on a youth advisory council, we are lending our thoughts, our energy, our experiences, and we need to be funded. As well, when we're doing our own work as a youth-led initiative or a network, it's really hard to access funding for youth-led networks. What if we're not official or registered registered or don't meet the specific criteria. And within Canada, there are a good amount of youth-led funding mechanisms, for example, like Youth Action Now and Youth Rising, but there needs to be more. There really truly needs to be more. As well, when you are working with youth-led networks, we need to fund their data, you know, especially in some places, data is expensive, internet is expensive, and when we're expecting them to be on a Zoom call, you know, that could be inaccessible to them as well. And then as well as let's partner with youth-led networks. Just for example, how two older organizations partner with each other on projects, a youth-led network and, for example, an older organization can partner together. For example, like Youth Coalition for Sexual Reproductive Health and Rights have partnered with CARE and are delivering a very sustainable project, and that's amazing. So let's continue that. I think as organizations, let's really map out the youth-led networks in our area and in our region and reach out to them, see how we can, you know, mutually really create a intergenerational space of knowledge sharing and mutual mentorship as well. I think those are some actionable items. I'm curious to hear the other panelists' thoughts.
So if there are any points, I'll say just add, Yipeng, just 1 point, Julia, 1 point to what Natasha has said. Actionable items, please.
An actionable item. I was going to say something else. I hope it's okay if I can just quickly say it, because I don't want to prolong, don't want to go over my
in 30
time.
seconds.
Okay. You know, I think about, you know what, you know, I would just like ditto what Natasha said, really, just like everything, because I think about why I've been able to do some of the things that I've been able to do, and, you know, and thinking about privilege and thinking about, you know, some of the things that were decided by my parents that allow for me to, you know, think about some complex issues related to health equity and determine have guided my professional career into a residency program in public health and preventive medicine and training clinically as well. And entering spaces like this, it takes a certain level and amount of privilege. And thinking about, you know, other youth that don't have that degree and level of privilege, and how do you break down those barriers and obstacles, especially when the way that sometimes I think youth or any other group, for that matter, are approached for their expertise, guidance, advice, is often non-compensated and voluntold or volunteered. And so how do you appropriately build those mechanisms so that youth can meaningfully participate, because they're going through their professional and studious careers, and often need those kinds of supports.
Thanks, Yipeng. So just ensuring that we're building, you know, the platforms for meaningful engagement for the youth. Julia, is there one actionable item you want to add on to this?
Well, first of all, I just take action from what Natasha said, and we'll think about the ways in which we integrate youth led networks into our ProX, which is our Project Explorer, which maps out Canadian initiatives in global health and gender equality. So that could be a filter. So I take that action. And then building on what both have said, I think thinking about youth and all their diversity too. And I was turned down from multiple internships and multiple opportunities because at 18 I had a child, and so I was a mother and a youth, and you know, went to university and wanted to go on the international development program. I had arranged for my sister to come do childcare in Kenya, and they said, no, the university can't allow you to take a kid. Like, this is for young people. And I was like, well, I'm 20, you know, and the same age as everyone else in this program. And that happened multiple times. And so I think just thinking about those things, those ways in which youth look different and have different needs, and this certainly extends into the disability space and things like that. It is more expensive for certain people to participate in initiatives, and doing your best to think through that. Even when we ran the program to bring young people and people from across Canada to Women Deliver, it's more expensive to bring someone from the far north. You have to have that in your budget and think through that to get them there. It's going to take them more time to travel. They need food while they, all these things, right? And I think it's recognizing that not everyone, in the case of Canada, lives in Toronto and is ready to like pack a suitcase and go on, take some opportunity, take time to be on a panel, that kind of thing. Youth in all their diversity, I guess, would be adding to what has already been said on that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Julia, for that. So just understanding that the youth are a diverse group of people and ensuring that you have the, the tools and wherewithal to ensure that they're engaged and ensuring they have resources. Thank you so much all for your excellent points. We're beginning to run out of time now, so I have to do my job and make sure that we're sticking to the time. Yipeng, you've been on several boards and a student rep, you're a full board member in organizations such as the Canadian Medical Foundation. Can you just tell me one challenge, or tell the audience one challenge that you faced in association with that role, and one opportunity, or that you have as a result of being on that role, in 30 seconds or 1 minute?
Got it. So I think the challenge would be imposter syndrome, as Julia mentioned. I think someone who comes in earlier on in their career, identifies as a youth, we come in with a degree of humility for who we are, what we know, and sometimes, are more prone to something like feeling like you've got the weight of the entire youth movement on your shoulders, and whether or not what you say, what you do will shatter that relationship for those others in that space that are relying on you for the quote unquote youth voice. And I think that can weigh someone down, and has surely, lies me at points in time in thinking about how do I, pick myself up in a way to effectively do this role, stay true to who I am, and recognize that, there's so much diversity in what, what youth represent, and how do I do the best job from what I do know. I think the flip side to that is, despite others that I've worked with who have perhaps more lived experience, more formal training in certain environments, to have certain conversations, and quote unquote experts in certain areas or fields of practice. Youth are also experts. I think that took me a while to learn, but we are experts in the experiences that we have, and often are, if you're in school or a student, then you are an expert in that. You are living and breathing what it's like to be, a complex human being, going through the educational system, going through a training program, going through that really crucial and really interesting part in someone's life, and trying to figure out where you see yourself professionally and personally. And that is a really special kind of feeling that you can draw from to have really meaningful conversations, and perhaps shape some really great outcomes from those conversations.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Yipeng. So we're really drawing to a close of our conversation, and my last question is a topic I think we have on everyone's mind. COVID-19 has affected our lives in many ways than one. So I'll start with Natasha. followed by Julia and Yipeng in 1 minute each. What is your vision for youth participation in building back better post-COVID-19?
My vision is an intergenerational leadership response in building back better. I don't want to go back to normal. I want there to be a new normal in the way that young people participate. And yeah, I don't know. That's like 20 seconds, but that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thanks, Natasha. Julia?
Yeah, I'll try to be 20 seconds too. Yeah, I agree. I think the aim is not going back to normal. The aim is something much bigger and much better. And from my perspective, I think youth are at the forefront of that. It's not that we need them to be, it's not that they just are, and we need them to be, and all those things. But I see that everywhere I look, is that youth are leading these movements. So it's about kind of wrapping around and creating the spaces for that leadership, and resourcing that leadership, and resourcing sort of from a care perspective and also from a financial perspective. And then going back to my opening point, it's about learning from each other and just coming back, and humility has been mentioned many times, and just coming back to the table over and over and over again until we get this thing right, until we get this thing better than it was before.
Yipeng.
I will keep it short and sweet, I promise. So, I think we all recognize that the pandemic has disproportionately affected certain populations and have exaggerated pre-existing discrepancies in access to different services, to things like healthcare, and have exaggerated inequities and injustices. So what building back better looks like, I think, needs to have an equity lens and needs to have a sustainability lens. And the last thing that I'll quickly mention is, I think there's a general understanding that the healthcare system is one, the one, like I'm sitting in a family medicine clinic right now, is one where a space where we can work on things like health and well-being. But I think we, and this is not a new concept, is shifting everyone's understanding of what health and well-being actually is. It's all those things that actually happen outside of the clinic, outside of the hospital, like the built environment, like having good education, having nutritious, affordable food at home, having a safe and good connections to family, friends, supports, all those things. And so we should be shifting away from focusing on healthcare and actually moving towards systems for health to build back better.
Thank you so much, Yipeng, and thank you to all the panelists. I actually was going to summarize the themes, but I don't think we have enough time to do that. So what I heard, I'll just share a few key words that I heard, just in terms of youth leadership and who the youth are. What are the things that could describe a youth? I heard resilience. I heard adaptability, boldness, quietness, quiet leadership. I heard, not ensuring that we're not using stereotypes on youth. So these are some of the, kind of words that we heard through the session. I'm very aware that we're running out of time, but I just wanted to say thank you to our panelists, Julia, Yipeng, Natasha. Incredible conversation. I definitely enjoyed it, and I hope that our participants on Facebook Live also enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for being part of the conversation to our participants on Facebook. I'd like to remind you that you can ask questions. If you have questions, that you can send emails to CanWaCH. I'll say Julia, they could connect with CanWaCH, or to the participants directly, and they'll respond to you on Facebook. Also, there's a video that's available on Facebook for you to share on your pages. Thank you to everyone. Merci à tous, and happy International Youth Day.